This episode of the CyberWire is made possible in part by Pantera. The newly minted unicorn is taking a whole new approach to security validation, allowing every organization to continuously test the integrity of all cybersecurity layers, including against ransomware and leaked credentials, by emulating real-world attacks at scale to pinpoint the most exploitable vulnerabilities and prioritize patching with a risk-based remediation plan. Know your risk in real time, all day, every day. Learn more at Pantera.io. Killnet claims a DDoS campaign against Estonia. The head of GCHQ calls Russian cyber operations a failure. U.S. Cyber Command concludes its Hunt Forward mission in cooperation with Croatia. A criminal gang targets the travel and hospitality sectors. Thomas Pace of NetRise shares insights on firmware vulnerabilities. Daniel Floyd from BlackCloak on quantifying the business need for digital executive protection. And CISA issues 5 ICS security advisories. From the CyberWire studios at Data Tribe, I'm Dave Bittner with your CyberWire summary for Friday, August 19th, 2022. In retaliation for Estonia's removal of a Soviet-era war memorial, a T-34 tank, from a park in Narva this week, a large distributed denial of service incident was conducted Wednesday by the Russian hacktivist front group Killnet, Reuters reports. The effects were negligible. With some brief and minor exceptions, websites remained fully available throughout the day. The attack has gone largely unnoticed in Estonia, according to reports. The incident is reminiscent of a 2007 cyber riot conducted by Russian operators against Estonia in response to the relocation of another war memorial from a public square in Tallinn to a cemetery. That 2007 incident has come to be regarded as the first clear case of a cyber war waged by one country against another's infrastructure. An op-ed in The Economist by GCHQ Director Sir Jeremy Fleming characterizes Russian offensive cyber operations in the present war as a failure, stating, "We have seen the Russian state try to align and coordinate cyber capabilities alongside more traditional facets of military power. To date, this hybrid intent has not succeeded. The impact has been less than we, and they, expected." Fleming attributes the lack of Russian success in its cyber campaigns to effective Ukrainian defensive efforts, assisted by international allies, stating, "As we have witnessed heroic defense by Ukraine's military, online we have seen arguably the most effective defense cyber activity in history. Operating under sustained pressure against a very capable adversary, this team of industry, intelligence, security agencies, and in some cases citizens, has worked side by side to warn, respond, and remediate." And he teases an allusion to extensive British operational support of Ukraine in cyberspace, saying, "An important component of our response to this situation may involve the UK's National Cyber Force, a partnership between GCHQ and the Ministry of Defence. This builds out from our world-class cyber defence and resilience to deliver offensive cyber capabilities. I won't go into detail about NCF activity. Stealth and ambiguity are key attributes of cyber operations. This secret and important work is conducted in accordance with international law and domestic legislation. It is authorized by ministers and scrutinized by judicial commissioners. It is this ethical, proportionate, and legal approach that sets us apart from our adversaries and from Russia's use of cyber capabilities in this war." The U.S. Cyber National Mission Force, an element of Cyber Command, has concluded what it characterizes as a successful Hunt Forward mission in conjunction with Croatia, Cyberscoop reports. U.S. Cyber Command did not explicitly connect the operation with Russia's war against Ukraine, but as the record points out, the command has said that it was giving priority in its Hunt Forward operations to threats linked to Russia, and other recent deployments to Eastern Europe have been avowedly conducted for defense against Russian cyber operations. Security firm Mandiant reported yesterday on activity it's recently observed by APT-29, the Russian SVR operation commonly referred to as Cozy Bear. Mandiant says, "We have observed APT-29 continue to demonstrate exceptional operational security and advanced tactics targeting Microsoft 365. We are highlighting several newer TTPs used by APT-29 in recent operations. Among its recent tactics has been the disabling of licenses in Microsoft 365 in ways that disable the important security functions performed for the suite by purview audit. Once disabled, they begin targeting inboxes for email collection. The threat actor has also been observed conducting successful password guessing attacks that have enabled it to take over dormant accounts and exploit the access thereby obtained. In all of this, Mandiant credits APT-29 with an unusually high degree of operational security." Security researchers at Proofpoint report that TA-558, a criminal gang the researchers assess as a financially motivated small crime threat actor targeting hospitality, hotel, and travel organizations, has increased the tempo of its operations in 2022, stating, "Since 2018, this group has used consistent tactics, techniques, and procedures to attempt to install a variety of malware, including Loader Rat, VJ Worm, and Revenge Rat. Its targets have for the most part been in Latin America, its emails generally written in Portuguese or Spanish." The report concludes, TA-558 is an active threat actor targeting hospitality, travel, and related industries since 2018. Activity conducted by this actor could lead to data theft of both corporate and customer data, as well as potential financial losses. Organizations, especially those operating in targeted sectors in Latin America, North America, and Western Europe, should be aware of this actor's tactics, techniques, and procedures. Proofpoint has indeed provided a guide to those tactics, techniques, and procedures. The U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency has made 7 additions to its known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. As CISA reminds in its announcement, Binding Operational Directive 22-01, reducing the significant risk of known exploited vulnerabilities, established the Known Exploited Vulnerabilities Catalog as a living list of known CVEs that carry significant risk to the federal enterprise. BOD 22-01 requires FCEB agencies to remediate identified vulnerabilities by the due date to protect FCEB networks against active threats. The newly added vulnerabilities affect SAP, Apple iOS, Mac OS, Chrome, Microsoft Active Directory and Windows, and Palo Alto Networks Pan OS. All of these are undergoing active exploitation in the wild, and U.S. federal civilian executive branch agencies falling under CISA's oversight are required to check their enterprise software and apply vendor patches no later than September 9, 2022. And finally, CISA has also released 5 industrial control system advisories affecting systems from Siemens and Mitsubishi Electric. The list of advisories can be found on CISA's website. Operators should read and heed. And now, a word from our sponsor, Recorded Future. Staying one step ahead of the rapidly evolving threat landscape requires a constant flow of daily intelligence. To stay up to date on everything happening in the world of cybersecurity, join over 50,000 other security professionals who subscribe to the Cyber Daily. With daily email updates on the latest cybersecurity news, top threat actors, exploited vulnerabilities, suspicious IP addresses, and more, the Cyber Daily is the first thing security professionals check every morning. To learn more and subscribe for free, go to recordedfuture.com/cyber-daily. And we thank Recorded Future for sponsoring our show. BlackCloak is a security firm focused on the unique needs of executives, board members, and high-access employees. They recently released their latest report titled Quantifying the Business Need for Digital Executive Protection. Daniel Floyd is Chief Information Security Officer at BlackCloak.
What we've encountered is on the corporate executive side, these home networks actually resemble more of a small office network, or even in some cases, an enterprise network. What we've discovered is, home wireless systems that have multiple access points, 15, 20 access points, wireless LAN controllers, multiple switches, PoE switches, anything from Cisco to Fortinet routers and VPNs and firewalls, home theater automation systems from Savant, Crestron, Control4. So when you actually look at these types of home setups, they start to resemble more of a corporate small office or even enterprise office setup.
And is this just from a practical point of view that these folks tend to have larger homes with more gadgets in them?
Yes. It's both the larger homes, as if you get into the 10,000 plus square foot home, you're going to have a need to have a multiple access point system. Due to that need, you're going to have multiple wireless LAN controllers, multiple access points, and this is where you get into the more enterprise grade systems. And then you'll also have potentially IP camera systems, and this is where you'll see power over Ethernet switches, HP, Cisco types of switches like that you wouldn't see in a standard home setup for most people.
Now, in this executive's day-to-day life, in their interactions with their company, is it that their home is kind of out of sight, out of mind in terms of the security folks they have at the office?
Yes, absolutely. So, one of the things that, corporates, SOCs, and security teams struggle with is, they're specialized in their corporate security. So they have within the four walls of their security, your SOC is specialized in the type of equipment that you've purchased, right? You may be a Cisco shop, you may be a Juniper shop. Whereas the home networks are really outside the purview of the security team at the organization. And, these executive home networks are like snowflakes. No home is the same. So you have 20 executives, you're going to have 20 different setups. One home may have a Cisco wireless system set up with HP switches. The next home could be Fortinet. The next home could be Sonic Wall. The next home could be Ubiquity. You're never going to see the same home setup unless the security team at the organization set that up. It's literally going to be a snowflake per home, which makes it difficult for the security team to have the skill sets to secure these homes or even have the permission to secure these homes. And then in addition to the different types of setups you see, you have the privacy concerns. Where do you draw the line in the sand from what the security team at the organization should be doing at the office versus what access they should have at the individual's homes?
Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question, which is, is there a cultural issue here as well that, the security folks don't want to mess with the boss's house, right?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, there's absolutely the privacy implications of it, both for the executive, but also for the security team. It could be a very uncomfortable situation for the security team to have to physically access the device, physically access the home, come across something, that's more privacy related that they shouldn't have.
Right.
And it can really become a very, awkward, sticky situation.
Teenage kids.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. The home network is a totally different paradigm, right? You have, the things that you can block and prohibit on a corporate network because it's owned by the company is totally different than what's going to be at a home network. The home network is going to be wide open. You're not going to be able to deploy URL filtering. There's no Zscaler. There's no, really shouldn't be, installing Palo Alto firewalls at everyone's home.
Right.
Unless you do some type of network segmentation. And that can get real complicated, real messy over time.
How much of a real-world threat is this? I mean, in terms of the things that you all are tracking, are the executives' homes a target?
Absolutely. So what we've discovered is, almost a little over 20% of the executive homes have open ports. That can lead to, as I mentioned before, security cameras, VPNs, routers, firewalls. And if you actually go back a few years, there was a breach that occurred at a major social media company, which I won't name, that actually occurred via this exact same attack vector. It actually was an executive. It was a security site reliability engineer, was working from home, and there was an attacker that discovered his home IP address. And a lot of these home IP addresses are available on data broker sites. And you can actually Google an individual or executive's name, and through a number of different ways, through OSINT, actually determine what their public IP address is. This threat actor was able to compromise a device that was running at this link or social media employee's home, that he was then able to then pivot from the privately owned device into a work computer that contained the SSH keys to access the remote access environment at the company.
Well, so based on the information that you all have gathered here, what are your recommendations? How should folks come at this?
So some of the strategies to reduce the risk at the executives' homes are, kind of the same strategies that you would deploy at your corporate office, starting with asset management. What are the devices that are at the home? What types of devices are at the home? You don't know you can't secure what you don't know. So, taking an inventory of these types of devices. Then, the same strategies that you would deploy at the corporate office, you deploy at the home, ensuring the devices are patched, make sure they're not end of life, making sure they still have support, making sure there's no misconfigurations or default credentials on these devices, things of that nature. One of the other things that we found very effective, a very low cost, high fidelity, low false positive rate, is to deploy a honeypot or deception-like device at the home. We've discovered that, as honeypots can act as a early warning radar or early warning trigger system, if someone does gain a foothold into the network, one of the first things they're going to do is enumeration and attempt to pivot. And if you set up a nice, juicy target, such as a honeypot, it's a very effective way to detect an intruder in the network.
That's Daniel Floyd from BlackCloak. There's a lot more to this conversation. If you want to hear more, head on over to the CyberWire Pro and sign up for Interview Selects, where you'll get access to this and many more extended interviews. And now, a word from our sponsors, KnowBe4. So, what's a con game? It's a fraud that works by getting the victim to misplace their confidence in the con artist. In the world of security, we call confidence tricks social engineering. And as our sponsors at KnowBe4 can tell you, human error is how most organizations get compromised. Where there's human contact, there can be con games. It's important to build the kind of security culture in which your employees are enabled to make smart security decisions. To do that, they need new school security awareness training. See how your security culture stacks up against KnowBe4's free phishing test. Get it at knowbe4.com/phishing test. That's knowbe4.com/phishing test. And we thank KnowBe4 for sponsoring our show. Thomas Pace is co-founder and CEO at NetRise, where they focus on the security of firmware and things like ICS, IoT, and medical devices. We kicked off our conversation with a look toward the skies, considering the security of satellites.
Satellites have, or any kind of space devices, including the associated infrastructure to support them, such as like ground stations and the radar, any of the other kind of supporting infrastructure required, have kind of been ignored for a reason that I guess I don't totally understand. They are just devices like anything else. And so having appropriate visibility into the software components that are present on these devices that are obviously serving incredibly critical functions in the world, in our society, for the military, et cetera, is paramount. And that's really been lacking.
Earlier in my career, back in I suppose around the early 2000s or so, I was working in television, and I remember having a conversation with a satellite engineer, and this was really during the transition from analog to digital. And I remember asking him, what keeps someone from stepping on another person's satellite transmission? And he said, courtesy. And that was it. I remember my jaw kind of hitting the floor. Have we progressed much past that?
I don't think so. I mean, you do have specific, there's government bans in communication channels that I think are challenging for some people to leverage in some cases. But
right.
It's really the FCC that's regulating and monitoring this. It seems to happen at DEF CON just about every year, where people bring radio jammers and are talking on channels and frequencies they're not supposed to. Mm. So things like the 911 channels, the emergency response channels, like the police scanning channels that are reserved for specific things, obviously. And they don't want people on there, screwing around or messing with things or blocking those radio frequencies, things like that. But yeah, that stuff's just floating around in space. So being able to listen in or jam it or add your own, whatever it is, isn't that huge of a challenge necessarily.
So what are organizations like yours bringing to bear here? What are some of the mitigations that you all are proposing?
Yeah, so what we are bringing to bear here is gaining visibility into what is going on inside of these devices. People view a lot of these devices, IoT, ICS, medical devices, embedded systems in vehicles, telecommunications equipment, and satellites as these mystical black boxes where we don't have any idea what's going on inside. The reason we don't know what's going on inside is pretty simple. No one's looking. And why is no one looking? Because it's challenging. It's not like looking inside of a Windows operating system or a Linux operating system or something like that. It typically has to be done by evaluating the firmware that is running on these devices. And firmware is a just much harder thing to extract, analyze, and find risks in for a myriad of reasons. Now, we're very good at doing that. So simplifying visibility for very difficult things to gain visibility to is basically what we are doing. So now we can say things like, okay, we've identified these software components that exist in these devices. Once we do that, we can say these vulnerabilities exist for these software components, and then these vulnerabilities can be exploited. They're being leveraged for ransomware, or we find things like weak credentials, default credentials. We find things like expired certificates or certificates that have been where the certificate authority has been compromised. We find public keys and the private keys are both in the same firmware image, which obviously is, I think, what you would call a worst practice. So things like that. Once we get access into the firmware and we've extracted that out and can identify the software components, you're basically solving that problem in the same way you solve a lot of these problems for normal devices. But getting into them is a really big part of the challenge. And that's what we've done, really, really well across a very wide, heterogeneous, disparate set of device types.
Yeah. I suppose, there's that old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But that really doesn't apply here because, as you say, vulnerabilities can be discovered along the way. So even though something may be sitting there doing its function, it doesn't mean that it's not essentially a sitting duck.
That's 100% right. So we have identified something it's well over 1 million what are known as end-day vulnerabilities. So they're not 0 days. What this means is these are vulnerabilities whereby, OpenSSL vulnerabilities, as an example. Let's say there's vulnerabilities from 10 years ago. And I go look in that National Vulnerability Database, and I want to say, what devices have this vulnerability? There's a 0% chance that every device that has that version of OpenSSL is in the National Vulnerability Database. That's just not the way it goes. So what we have figured out is there's countless devices, countless, that are not even in the NVD at all. And so every vulnerability that we find in a software component in a device like that is basically known as an end day, meaning this is a vulnerability that is known to exist, but is not known to exist on this device because no one's looked. And that could be because the device manufacturers don't even have a product security team, which is more common than I would care to admit. But it's also just because, time to market matters with these devices, and the security of them kind of takes a back seat. But at the same time, we're seeing attacks now. I mean, we've been seeing attacks for a very long time. A lot of these attacks weren't maybe in the public eye, especially for people who are working in the darker corners of the government that knew these kind of things were happening. But now it's in the mainstream. Like, there was a big firewall manufacturer last year that literally recommended to their clients to turn off their firewalls because a vulnerability was being exploited that was allowing attackers to launch ransomware attacks within their environment through their firewall. So who's watching the watchman, as they say? Like, there's a bunch of really famous VPN hacks last year that were also being used for the same thing. Speaking of satellites, there was a large satellite manufacturer that had an issue recently, but that actually came through VPN vulnerabilities that gained them access to the satellites. So you can see here that this is not like just saying like, hey guys, these are risks. Like, there's risks in every single thing we do every single day. There are actual tangible attacks that have been happening for years against these devices via exploiting the firmware vulnerabilities.
That's Thomas Pace from NetRise. Thanks to all of our sponsors for making the CyberWire possible, especially our supporting sponsor, Keeper Security. Protect every user and system in your organization with zero trust and zero knowledge security. Visit keepersecurity.com/cyberwire to learn more. And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, check out our daily briefing at thecyberwire.com. Be sure to check out this weekend's Research Saturday and my conversation with Dick O'Brien from Symantec. We're discussing the ClipMiner botnet making operators at least $1.7 million. That's Research Saturday. Check it out. The CyberWire podcast is proudly produced in Maryland out of the startup studios of Data Tribe, where they're co-building the next generation of cybersecurity teams and technologies. Our amazing CyberWire team is Elliot Peltzman, Trey Hester, Brandon Karp, Eliana White, Drew Prakash, Liz Irvin, Rachel Gelfin, Tim Nodar, Joe Kerrigan, Carol Terrio, Ben Yellen, Nick Valecki, Gina Johnson, Bennett Moe, Chris Russell, John Petrick, Jennifer Iben, Rick Howard, Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here next week. Hey everybody, Dave here. Are your sales and marketing teams tasked with ever-growing brand awareness and lead gen goals? The CyberWire is a great way to put your message into the ear of decision makers across cyber and help fill your funnel. We have great sponsorship opportunities available, but we're filling up fast. Contact our team now to learn more about how sponsorship of the CyberWire can help build your business at thecyberwire.com/sponsor.